You'll have to excuse the winter aesthetic. I am extremely cold, so I'm wearing a beanie from the company I used to work for backwards. It's time to talk about a Mariner transaction. I was wondering how long it would take, and we got one. It's not a surprise, and I'll point. Look, let's just get into it. The Mariners declined Jorge Polanco's 12 million club option for 2025, and instead will pay him a $750,000 buyout. And when I saw the news, and we'll talk about another transaction they made as well at the end of the video, I said that I was kind of surprised. And surprised is not the right word because this was expected. I had just heard, in my job, I hear rumblings and grumblings and all sorts of things that there was a possibility that the Mariners would pick up Jorge Polanco's option. Ultimately, this is the expected move, but I heard just enough chatter the other way that I can say that I was at least a little surprised. And again, surprised probably not the right word. I wouldn't have been shocked if it went the other way, is what I should have said. But, I'm not going to pay for that edit button, so I'm not going to change it. But it's not a huge surprise. I said the word surprise like 40 times already in this video. So let's look at what Polanco did for the Mariners last year. And if you want to just say more like what he didn't do, go for it. He hit 213, 296, 355 with 16 homers and 4 stolen bases in 469 plate appearances. That's a 651 OPS, and that is an OPS plus of 93. So a below average hitter. Slightly below average, but below average. And that's certainly disappointing considering that's not what the Seattle Mariners picked up Jorge Polanco to be. And he was a guy who in 2023 had a 114 OPS plus, in 2022, 115, in 2021, 125. He was a guy who hit 33 homers in that 2021 season. And in limited time, he hit 16 and 14 homers, but he was a guy who slugged well above 355. Well above. Unfortunately, with Seattle, that power didn't come. The average dropped considerably, and the swing and miss, which had not been a huge issue for Polanco in the past, struck out, but not at the rates that he did in Seattle. 137 times in 469 plate appearances. Let's take a look at the Savant page for Polanco. So for those of you unfamiliar with Baseball Savant, it's an awesome page. I know I reference it a lot. It makes my job a lot easier. That's for dang sure. But what it does is it takes a look at, basically breaks down everything a player can do, and where they rank among major league players is one of the things that a lot of people, including me, use it. It can be dangerous, but there's a lot of helpful information. And what this page tells you, for those, again, who are unfamiliar, when you're in the red on a stat, you're doing well. When you're in the the reddish blue, you're about average. And when you're in the blue, it's bad. And there's a lot of blue for Jorge Polanco this year. He was in the 16th percentile in expected batting average. Well, let's just do this first. His batting run value was in the 14th percentile of all hitters, and his fielding run value was in the bottom 5% of all hitters. That's awful. That is really awful. Expected batting average was in the 16th percentile. Average exit velocity was in the 32nd percentile. Hard hit percentage was in the 34th percentile. And the K percentage, the big thing here, was in the 10th percentile. Now, what was interesting about Polanco was, I think a lot of times there's two different types of hitters, right? There are two types of different hitters who strike out a lot, is what I mean to say. There are the guys who strike out a lot because they're hackers and they swing at pitches outside of the strike zone. And then there are those guys who strike out a lot because they're patient and they get a lot of 2-strike counts because they wait for the pitch. And I think you might think when looking at Jorge Polanco, the profile, you'd expect him to be one of those hackers, but he wasn't a hacker at all last year. His walk rate was well above average. His chase rate was well above average. He just, with 2 strikes, struck out a ton and just didn't make very much hard contact. And on top of that, his defense was really bad. Now, I thought it improved as the year went on. until it didn't. It crashed hard at the end of the year. Range outs above average in the bottom 2 percentile. And he doesn't have a very strong throwing arm, which is one of the reasons why the Mariners, even with their third base issues, never really gave Jorge Polanco a look there. Not good. Not good. There's nothing here that suggests that Jorge Polanco was a good player. There's nothing here that suggests that Jorge Polanco was an unlucky player. Let's just take a look at what he did by month as well. Rather, let's just call this the splits portion of the stats. So, switch hitter, but equally bad against right-handers and left-handers. A 198 average with a 646 OPS against righties, a 250 average, which is, substantially better, but only a 664 OPS against left-handed pitching, in part because he actually got on base at a higher clip against right-handers, a 301 OBP compared to 285. Now, we have a lot of Seattle Mariners who do not hit well at home, especially new players. We see this a lot. And this is the case for Jorge Polanco as well. 193, 284, 322 in the not-so-friendly confines of T-Mobile Park. But he was pretty darn bad on the road as well. Better, but still pretty darn bad. 233, 308, 386, 694. 7 homers at home in 58 games, 9 homers away in 60 games. So that, it was a case of, sure, the stats are better away, but they're not like, oh my gosh, look how great this guy is away from Seattle. Like, that's not even kind of close to good enough. Batting average in balls in play, by the way, away 287. That's about an average number. 260, slightly below average, but again, it's not a case of bad luck. First half versus second half, however, and this is one of the things I wanted to, we'll get into it. First half of the year, Jorge Polanco was an absolute tire fire. 61 games, 197, 285, 282, 5 homers, and he struck out 78 times in 239 at-bats. Second half of the year, which is a sample for Jorge Polanco of just 9 fewer plate appearances, but oh so much better. 230, 309, 431, 11 homers, and 27 RBI if you're into that sort of thing. That's an OPS of 740. I think we would sign up for an OPS of 740 for Polanco. It's slightly disappointing, but I think you can sign up for it. But it's interesting to look here. It's all basically carried by 1 month because April and March, 604 OPS. May, 572 OPS. June, only 5 games, 474 OPS. August, 693 OPS. September, October, 631. Those of you who are paying attention, and I sure appreciate it, will note that I skipped July because July was the month. 22 games, and he had a 783 OPS with 5 homers. Outside of that, he was a well below average hitter. And it's surprising to see how much better he is in the second half, but it's basically carried by how good he was in July and the start of August. Because he wasn't good at the end of August, and he certainly wasn't good in September, October. Any other stats here that are interesting? I think it's kind of interesting to look at the batting average stuff here. He hit third to begin the year, and it was bad. 205, 301, 368. That's a 668 OPS. Moved down to fourth for a little bit and was much more effective there. 577 slugging percentage, but it's only a sample of 7 games. Where he mostly hit was fifth and 183, 288, 330. 746 OPS in 20 games as the 6th hitter and a 580 OPS batting 7th. He did bat 8th twice, hit 167, so he went 1 for 6. Yeah, those splits tell you that Jorge Polanco, it's a long story short, just wasn't close to an effective baseball player for the Seattle Mariners. And that's not even before we look at the defense. It's disappointing. Now, having said all of that, if you put some sort of weapon to my head, and I once again will ask you not to do that, would you bring Jorge Polanco back? I'm still not sure. I kind of lean towards no, but only because I know how the Seattle Mariners operate. And if Jorge Polanco is making $12 million next year, that's being paid as a key cog. And yes, they pay the $750,000 buyout. That's a pittance. And so it's weird. Maybe I should have come up with an idea before I started recording this, or come up with an answer, I should say. I kind of lean towards, yeah, I would like Jorge Polanco back as a Seattle Mariner, but I understand why he's not coming back, because he was ineffective, and the Seattle Mariners don't pay $12 million to bounce back guys. That's just not the way they operate. So I guess the long term, or the long way of saying this, or what can you do? Words are hard. What I was trying to say very eloquently is that I would be interested in bringing Jorge Polanco back. Now, it would have to be on a 1-year prove it type deal, something in that $5 million range, with a bunch of escalators that can become higher with hitting certain marks. But most, you can't do it based on, they don't allow the incentive stuff based on homers, based on that stuff. But if you're playing well, you're going to reach plate appearances. And if you reach plate appearances, you're going to probably be an effective player, right? And you're going to get the money that you were hoping to earn. I don't think it's going to happen. I imagine that Jorge Polanco is going to look elsewhere, and he should. And I will not be shocked at all, not even a little bit. And this is not just based on LOL Mariners and the history of Seattle losing players, bringing in players and seeing them go have no success with Seattle and then go have success elsewhere. It won't shock me at all, not only because of that. I can't completely disregard that. It's just based on the fact that Jorge Polanco has been an effective player throughout his major league career until he came to Seattle. I think he's much more Jesse Winker than Colton Wong. So, or to make a more recent comparison, I think he's closer, not as good, but closer to being Teoscar Hernandez than he is to being Colton Wong. But I do get it. I'm not heartbroken by the decision. I'll say this, I'm not rooting against Jorge Polanco. I don't think there was anything Jorge Polanco, other than being an ineffective player, I don't think there was anything controversial about him. And he's been a really good player in the past. It is worth pointing out that the Mariners gave up two prospects and one major league player. Justin Topa, who had a injury-riddled, to say the least, season for the Twins. Gabriel Gonzalez, who had a very up and down and injury-riddled season as well. And I just forgot what the third piece was. That's what the pause button's for. How could I forget? Darren Bowen, who was dreadful, a 6.07 ERA in high A for Cedar Rapids. So, yes, Justin Topa is an effective pitcher when healthy, and Gabriel Gonzalez, despite a mediocre at best and injury-riddled season, does have some upside. This does not look like a disaster of a trade in terms of what they gave up. It's a disaster of a trade in terms of the production that they got from Jorge Polanco. But, and I don't want you to root against those guys, but it is worth pointing out that the players that they've given up have not made. Minnesota isn't exactly ringing in the profits of the Jorge Polanco trade yet. The other move the Seattle Mariners make is Luis Urias was waived, outrighted, and of course he elected free agency. The most obvious roster move you can make. He was projected, I believe, by MLB Trade Rumors to earn above $5 million. Nobody was going to pay that. The Seattle Mariners certainly weren't going to pay that, and they shouldn't have. He was a completely ineffective player. Showed some spurts as a lefty killer, but no, Luis Urias just doesn't serve a purpose on the Seattle Mariners. And that trade, again, Isaiah Campbell was awful for Boston. It's one of those, and I am not concerned about John Stanton's pocketbooks, but boy, I bet you he looks at that one and wonders, huh? That he had to pay that guy 4.7 million, and he was absolutely going to be non-tendered. Took a shot, didn't work. What do you guys think of the Jorge Polanco thing? Here's the other thing. Okay, real quick. So, what's your options at second base now? Got a little hair fuzzy. What are your options? Not a lot. Internally, it's Josh Rojas and it is Dylan Moore, which are also your third base options right now. Probably not what you're looking for. And this is not a great second base market. Now, Ha-Seong Kim, if he's willing to play second base, makes some sense. Are the Mariners willing to pay that type of money? Willie Adames obviously would be a great fit up the middle for the Seattle Mariners. They are not going to sign Willie Adames. Hope I'm wrong, because I think he is the second best free agent on the market. But this is the other thing with Polanco. It's not like they have great internal options. And I don't look at the trade market and say, oh, well, this is a perfect target. This is a perfect target. They could still do something. One of the things about Dipoto is he has done a wonderful job. And I know people will squirm at that thought of wonderful job in Dipoto, but he has done at the very least an admirable job of making moves out of nowhere. There's not a ton of transactions the Seattle Mariners have made that you can predict. So we'll see in that regard. But are there a ton of better options than Jorge Polanco, even as not acknowledging how bad he was? I'm not so sure. So yeah, you tell me what you guys think. Hit like, hit subscribe. Really appreciate the support. Bunch of Seattle Mariner content coming. Seahawks, Kraken, all that good stuff. Love you all. Jorge Polanco. Assuming you're not a Seattle Mariner, I wish you nothing but luck. Didn't work out, but these things happen.